Police radios crackled through the humid night as a frantic young man, shaking so violently that an officer had to hold his wrist steady, tried to explain what he had just done. His name was Elmer Wayne Henley, 17 years old, skinny, terrified and smeared with gunpowder on his hands. With a trembling voice, he repeated the same sentence over and over, as if trying to convince himself it was real. "I killed him. I killed Dean Corll. He was going to kill us all." Veteran officers expected the typical Texas murder case: drugs, rage, robbery. What they did not expect was the doorway into one of the most sadistic and horrifying webs of torture and homicide the United States had ever seen. Before sunrise, detectives would learn that Henley had not killed a random man. He had killed one of the most prolific serial murderers in American history, a man whose crimes were so hidden, so disturbingly organized, that the city had never even suspected a monster lived among them. But to understand how a polite, soft-spoken man earned the nickname, the Candyman, we need to go back to the years when Dean Corll moved through Houston unnoticed, careful, calculated, and always smiling just enough to look normal. The Candyman of Houston HIGHTS. Long before his name became synonymous with torture and murder, Dean Arnold Corll appeared painfully ordinary. Born December 24, 1939 in Indiana, his childhood was strict but not unusual. No record of violence, no obvious warning signs, no dark headlines waiting in the future. Neighbors remembered him as polite, almost shy. Teachers said he worked hard. Nothing about him suggested the cruelty that would later surface. When the Corll family moved to Houston, Dean worked in his mother's candy business, the Corll Candy Company. Local kids remembered the small factory well because Dean often handed out free candy after school. The boys in the neighborhood liked him. Parents trusted him. A few even joked that he spoiled the teenagers more than the children. The joke would age horribly, because behind the sweet facade, Dean Corll was already learning exactly how to lure boys into his orbit, through kindness, attention, gifts, and above all, the kind of patience no one imagined a predator could possess. The move toward darkness. By the mid-1960s, Corll's behavior shifted. He grew more withdrawn, more secretive. He favored the company of teenage boys, not adults. He bought them beer, let them hang out in the candy factory, gave them jobs. For boys growing up in poor neighborhoods with nothing to do and no one paying attention, Dean was the cool older guy who treated them like friends. Nobody questioned him. Nobody imagined what he was capable of. Then, in 1967, Corll met a 12-year-old boy named David Brooks. David came from a fractured home and was easy to influence. Dean showered him with attention, rides, gifts, money. Soon David was spending more time with Dean than in his own house. When Dean eventually crossed the line into exploitation, David was too young and too dependent to resist. Dean had found his first accomplice. But the darkest turning point came in 1970, when Corll realized how much control he had over younger teens, and how effortlessly he could manipulate them. His fantasies were escalating fast, and he needed a way to fulfill them without getting caught. He wanted victims he could dominate completely, victims who would not be missed immediately, victims whose disappearance wouldn't cause alarm. Houston's teenage boys, especially runaways and kids from unstable families, were perfect targets. It was around this time that the true horror began. The first VICTMS. In 1970, a teenage boy disappeared after last being seen near the candy factory. Then another, and another. Their families worried, posted flyers, begged police for help, but Houston at that time had a growing problem with runaways, kids fleeing strict homes, poverty, drugs, or the dangerous streets themselves. Police told parents the same thing. He probably ran away, he'll come back. But they never came back. Meanwhile, Dean Corll was evolving. The more he killed, the more methodical he became. His rented homes turned into torture chambers, soundproof rooms, thick plywood boards with handcuffs, ropes, and boxes filled with tools. Corll didn't want quick murders. He wanted control, obedience, silence, and the certainty that no one could escape him. In his mind, he was building a private kingdom of suffering. And to expand it, he recruited more help. Enter Elmer Wayne Henley. In 1971, a 15-year-old boy named Wayne Henley came into Corll's life. Like David Brooks, Wayne came from a difficult home and was eager for money. Corll approached him with a horrifying offer disguised as a business opportunity. Bring boys to Dean's house, convince them to party, earn cash. Wayne believed, at first, that Dean was involved in a runaway smuggling operation. It was illegal but not deadly. At least that's what Wayne told himself. But eventually, he saw the truth, and by the time he realized how monstrous Dean truly was, he was already trapped inside the cycle. Dean controlled him through fear, manipulation, and the belief that there was no escape without consequences. Henley's life became a spiraling nightmare, part participant, part victim, part witness to horrors no teenager should ever see. And Dean Corll was fully unleashed. The House of Torture. Between 1970 and 1973, Corll abducted dozens of boys, luring some with alcohol or marijuana, convincing others to come over after school, and letting his two accomplices bring victims straight to him. Once inside, the boys faced hours or days of unimaginable torture. Neighbors heard nothing. Parents got no answers. Police believed these were just runaway cases. Houston remained unaware that a serial killer was hunting its sons. Meanwhile, Dean moved from house to house, 14 times in 3 years, careful never to stay in one neighborhood long enough to be noticed. Each house was ordinary from the outside, but inside, the same pattern repeated. A wooden torture board, handcuffs, ropes, plastic sheets. A quiet man who felt nothing but control. Corll was living a double life, so perfectly hidden that even his own family had no idea what he had become. Mounting tension, the breaking point. By the summer of 1973, Henley and Brooks were crumbling under the weight of what they had helped enable. Corll was becoming reckless, angrier, and more paranoid. He didn't trust his accomplices anymore. He didn't trust the boys he lured in. He didn't trust anyone but himself. It all exploded on August 8, 1973, inside a small house at 2020 Lamar Drive. That night, Corll invited Wayne Henley and a teenage boy to drink and sniff paint. It was supposed to be a party, the kind Corll had hosted dozens of times before. But when a teenage girl unexpectedly arrived with Wayne, Corll snapped, furious that Henley had brought a female into his private domain. The tension that had been building for years finally broke. And within hours, the nightmare inside that house would end with a gunshot, not from Dean Corll, but from the boy he thought he controlled. This is where part 2 will pick up. The night everything unraveled, the final attempted murders, the desperate struggle, and the gunshot that exposed the Houston mass murders to the world. The humid Texas night felt unnaturally still when Elmer Wayne Henley stepped inside the house at 2020 Lamar Drive on August 8, 1973. He had walked into Corll's homes hundreds of times before, rented rooms, small wooden houses, dusty apartments, places that looked plain from the outside but hid horrors few humans could imagine. But tonight felt different. The air was heavier. Dean was packing, anxious, irritable, his movements sharp and tense. Wayne had brought 2 friends. 17-year-old Timothy Tim Curley and 15-year-old Rhonda Williams. Neither of them knew the truth about the man who opened the door. They thought they were stopping by to hang out, drink a little, maybe smoke, maybe crash on the floor until morning. Teenagers in Houston did this all the time. Dean often let kids sleep over. It had never raised suspicion. But tonight it was a mistake, the kind that could cost all of them their lives. The moment Dean saw the girl, his expression twisted. His jaw tightened so hard that the muscles near his temples bulged. Wayne recognized the look. He had seen it before, always seconds before Dean exploded, a cold, silent rage that didn't come from anger alone, but from something darker, deeper, more animal. He hissed under his breath. "What the hell is she doing here?" Wayne tried to calm him. "Man, relax, she had nowhere else to go. Her dad kicked her out tonight, she's just crashing here." Dean glared at him, his eyes wild. "You ruined everything bringing a girl into my house." There was something deeply threatening in the way he said it, but Wayne forced a laugh and brushed it off. He didn't want Rhonda or Tim to know something was wrong. To them, this was supposed to be a normal night, or at least normal for the chaotic teenage world they lived in. But inside the walls of Corll's home, nothing was ever normal. Still, Dean restrained himself. After a few tense moments, he told them all to sit down. He handed out beers. He offered paint to sniff. He tried, in his own twisted way, to salvage the evening. For a while they laughed, talked, and drank. The tension seemed to loosen. Tim joked loudly, Rhonda teased Wayne, and Wayne felt a faint sense of relief. Maybe Dean had calmed down. Maybe he'd just go to bed and leave them alone. Maybe everything would be fine. But around 3:00 a.m., Dean abruptly stood up and left the room without saying a word. Wayne's stomach dropped. He knew that silence. He knew what came after it. Still groggy and half-dazed from alcohol and paint fumes, Wayne drifted off on the floor next to Rhonda. They slept for less than an hour. And then the nightmare began. The moment the trap sprung, Wayne woke slowly at first, as if rising from underwater. Something was touching his wrist. It felt cold, metallic. He heard rattling. When his eyes finally focused, he saw handcuffs locking around his arm. Dean Corll towered over him. The shock hit instantly. In a flash, Wayne jolted awake, only to see that Tim Corll was already gagged and bound, his hands tied above his head, ropes cutting into his wrists as he struggled. Rhonda was tied as well, crying through the cloth in her mouth. Wayne's heartbeat exploded. "Dean, what the hell are you doing?" he screamed, trying to twist his arm free. Dean's voice was eerily calm. "You've gone too far, Wayne. You brought a girl into my house. You're not on my side anymore." Wayne froze. This wasn't a punishment. This wasn't anger. This was a sentence. Dean tightened the cuff around Wayne's wrist. His breath was hot and fast. "I'm going to kill all of you." The words seemed to echo through the room, bouncing off the bare walls and sinking into the floorboards. Tim thrashed. Rhonda sobbed harder. Wayne felt his vision blur as panic surged through him. For the first time since he met him, Wayne saw something in Dean that terrified him more than anything else. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, no trace of humanity. Dean had already decided their fate. This was the night he would tie off every loose end, including Wayne. The turning point. Dean dragged Wayne by the arm, pulling him across the floor until he reached the hookup ring attached to the torture board. The plywood was stained dark blotches that looked old, dried, and permanent. Wayne had seen that board used on others. He had watched boys scream on it. Now he was about to feel the ropes himself. "Dean, stop. Listen to me, just stop," Wayne begged. Dean ignored him. He shoved Wayne's body onto the board with a sickening thud. Pain shot through Wayne's shoulder. Dean reached for the other handcuff, the one that would lock both of Wayne's wrists above his head. Then something unexpected happened. Dean paused. He stared down at Wayne, and in that brief hesitation, Wayne's survival instinct kicked in. He blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Dean, you don't have to do this. Look what I did for you. I brought you boys, I helped you. I did everything you asked." Dean froze again. The handcuff stopped inches from Wayne's skin. The moment seemed to stretch on forever. Wayne's brain raced. He didn't know if his words were helping or digging him deeper, but he kept talking, fast, desperate, hysterical. "Dean, you trusted me more than anyone. You told me that. You said I was the only one who understood you. If you kill me, who's going to help you? You'll be alone. Think, Dean, just think." For the first time the entire night, Dean's expression changed. His rage flickered into confusion, then contemplation, then uncertainty. Wayne seized the moment. "Let me help you," he whispered. "Let me prove I'm on your side." Dean stepped back. He lowered the handcuff. His breathing slowed. He looked at Wayne with cold calculation. Then he said, "All right, you can prove your loyalty. You can finish him off." Dean pointed directly at Tim Curley. Wayne felt the floor drop beneath him. Kill Tim. Kill his friend. With his own hands. The reality twisted his stomach into knots. Tim's eyes widened with terror through his gag. Rhonda shook her head violently, trying to scream. Wayne's mind raced through every terrible thing he had seen in this house. Every boy tied to that board. Every scream. Every body Dean had buried. For years he had been trapped in this world of horror, spiraling deeper with no escape. But at that moment, something irreversible snapped inside him. He realized that Dean would kill them all, no matter what he said. No matter what he did. This was not a test. This was not a negotiation. This was slaughter. And the only way out was to take control. The final moment. Corll walked away to check the knife and gather ropes. It was the first time he had turned his back on Wayne. It would also be the last. Wayne's thoughts exploded into one frantic conclusion. If I don't stop him now, we all die. His right hand, the only one not cuffed, slid along the floor until his fingers brushed something cool and metal under the edge of a blanket. It was the .22 caliber pistol Dean kept hidden. Wayne grabbed it. He stood up. His breath shook violently. His legs felt weak, but adrenaline drove him forward. Dean turned. The two locked eyes. Dean's expression shifted from confusion to anger, to betrayal, to something almost inhuman. "You won't do it," he growled. "Give me that gun." Wayne's voice broke. "You've gone too far, Dean." Dean lunged. Wayne fired. The first bullet slammed into Corll's forehead, knocking him backwards into the wall. But Dean didn't fall. He staggered, stunned but not finished. Wayne fired again, and again. The last shots echoed through the small house like thunder, and Dean finally collapsed face down onto the carpet, blood spreading beneath him in dark waves. The monster of Houston Heights, the man who had tortured and murdered dozens of boys over 3 years, was dead. The house fell silent. Only Rhonda's shaking breath and Tim's muffled sobs broke the stillness. Wayne dropped the gun. He stared at his hands. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply said, "It's over." But it wasn't really over. Not even close. Because what came next would stun detectives, shock the nation, and unearth one of the most horrifying killing sprees in American history. A story buried beneath years of missing persons posters, ignored parents, and a city that had never imagined it was losing its children to a calm-voiced candy factory worker. Wayne freed Rhonda and Tim. They ran outside, gasping in the night air as if surfacing from deep water. At 8:24 a.m., Wayne voluntarily walked into the Pasadena police station and confessed everything. The officers didn't believe him at first. How could they? His story was too extreme, too grotesque, too impossible to be true. But when they walked into Corll's house, when they found the torture board, when they found the plastic sheet, the ropes, the hooks in the wall, the blood, the cold horror in the air, they realized the teenager wasn't lying. He had just killed a serial murderer, unlike any the country had ever known. And soon, the earth around Houston would be ripped open, literally, revealing the truth of how many boys Corll had buried beneath the soil. The Pasadena police station was usually quiet at 8:30 in the morning. Paperwork, coffee, exhausted officers leaning back in their chairs. But on August 8, 1973, everything changed when a skinny, trembling teenager walked through the glass doors and said, "I killed Dean Corll." At first, nobody reacted. Teenagers came in all the time: fights, petty theft, scared runaways, drunken arguments. But the boy in front of them had a look in his eyes that made even seasoned officers stop what they were doing. He wasn't angry or high or confused. He looked haunted. The desk sergeant asked him to repeat himself. Wayne inhaled shakily. "I killed him. He was going to kill me. He was going to kill all of us. I had to." The sergeant motioned him into a back room. Wayne sat down, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles went white. One of the officers noticed dried blood on his shirt. "Son, who is Dean Corll?" Wayne swallowed. He kills boys." Those 4 words made the room go still. The confession that no one believed. They thought Wayne was delusional, traumatized, maybe hallucinating from drugs, a serial killer. In Houston, killing boys with accomplices, torture boards, storage sheds, burial grounds. It sounded like the plot of a horror film. Officers humored him at first. "Okay, son, just tell us what happened." Wayne took a trembling breath and began a confession that would drag officers, detectives, and the entire state of Texas into one of the darkest criminal revelations in American history. He told them everything. How Dean targeted teenage boys. How he tricked them into his homes. How he chained them to boards. How he tortured them for days. How he killed them. And how Wayne and David Brooks had helped bring victims to him. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. This couldn't be real. No one could hide something like this for years, right? But then Wayne said something that made the room freeze. "There are bodies. I can show you where they are." The House of Horror. The first officers arrived at 2020 Lamar Drive minutes later. From outside, it looked like any other small Houston rental, 1-story, pale siding, unremarkable lawn. But the moment they stepped inside, the air felt wrong. Something sour. Something metallic. Something like old fear soaked into the walls. The living room looked normal enough, but as officers moved deeper into the house, they found the evidence Wayne had described. A large plywood torture board. Handcuffs bolted into each corner. Rope stained from repeated use. Plastic sheets. A thick extension cord. Boxes of tape, tools, and restraints. The entire house felt like a stage frozen in time. Crime paused mid-motion, as if Dean had only stepped out for a moment. Then they found his body. Dean Corll lay sprawled face down, shirt soaked red, blood pooled beneath him. The wall behind him was splattered. The gun, the shell casings, everything matched Wayne's story. But the officers still couldn't accept the rest. Serial murders. Teenage accomplices. Dozens of victims. Buried in shallow graves. It felt too massive, too evil. Then Wayne pointed toward a piece of folded paper tucked in Dean's wallet, a key. The key to a storage shed where Wayne said, "You'll find the bodies." Later that afternoon, the first dig site would be opened. The boat shed, a graveyard in plain sight. The storage unit was located in southwest Houston, an old metal-roofed boat shed that looked like it had been sitting there for decades. Officers unlocked it cautiously, expecting nothing more than dusty equipment, broken furniture, maybe some tools. But the moment they stepped inside, the smell hit them. A smell every homicide detective knows. A smell no one ever forgets. Decomposition. The floor was packed dirt, uneven and damp. Shovels leaned against the wall. Rolls of plastic lay open. The air was heavy, suffocating. Even before the first scoop of soil was turned over, they knew they were standing on top of something horrific. Wayne pointed to a spot in the ground. "Dig there." The officers hesitated. "Son, are you sure?" Wayne didn't look away. "Yes, I know what's under there." Detectives exchanged grim nods. And then the digging began. Within minutes, a shovel struck something solid. A bone. The digging accelerated. Officers worked in silence, faces twisted with dread, horror slowly rising inside them. One body appeared, then another, then a third. All teenagers. All male. All bound and gagged. News of the discovery raced across Houston like wildfire. Reporters flooded the boat shed. Helicopters hovered overhead. Police cars lined the dirt road like a funeral procession. Families who had spent years searching for their missing sons now stood at the edge of the shed, sobbing, praying, bracing for the truth. And Wayne wasn't finished. "There are more," he said. "Many more." Broks turns himself in. The next shock came when David Brooks, Corll's other teenage accomplice, heard the news on the radio. He walked into the police station that same night and turned himself in, terrified, guilt-ridden, completely unraveling. He confirmed Wayne's story immediately. Yes, Corll killed them. Yes, he helped bring boys to him. Yes, there were more graves. Yes, he knew some of the victims' names. Investigators now had two confessions, independent of each other, describing the same horrors. The impossible story was suddenly, undeniably real. The digging expands. Authorities moved quickly. Search teams were dispatched to the boat shed, Bolivar Peninsula, Lake Sam Rayburn, Corll's previous residences, remote wooded areas. Every location Wayne and Brooks mentioned was combed with shovels, cadaver dogs, and floodlights that burned through the night. Families arrived at each site holding photographs their sons had taken years before, asking detectives the same heartbreaking questions. "Is my boy here? Can you tell me if he's one of them?" Officers couldn't answer. The bodies were too decomposed. Identification would take time, dental records, clothing scraps, scars, sometimes only fragments. By the end of the first week, 17 bodies had been found. By the end of the investigation, the number climbed to at least 29, though many investigators believe the real number was higher. Some victims were found tied, some blindfolded, some still wrapped in plastic. Many were buried directly on top of each other, as if Corll didn't even care to separate them. Each discovery deepened the horror. Houston confronts its failure. The city was furious. Parents demanded answers from police. Why weren't their missing children investigated? Why were they dismissed as runaways? Why did the city ignore the patterns? Detectives could barely defend themselves. Houston in the early 70s was overwhelmed with juvenile runaways. Thousands of kids vanished every year, but excuses didn't soften the blow. Reporters attacked the police. Talk shows condemned them. Every parent felt betrayed. It was a failure that would haunt the department for decades. The media explosion. Newspapers ran headlines that dominated every front page. Houston Mass MURDERS. The Candyman Killer. Teen ACCUMPLICS reveal HORRORS. Journalists interviewed neighbors, teachers, pastors, and friends. Everyone said the same thing. Dean Corll didn't look like a killer. He was quiet, polite, normal. That was the most terrifying part. The nation was obsessed. How did a candy factory worker kill dozens of boys? How did he manipulate teenagers into helping him? How did no one notice? What drove him? What was he planning next? Most horrifying of all, Corll had purchased new restraints and supplies just days before he died. It was clear he wasn't slowing down. He was accelerating. Brooks and Henley faced justice. Wayne and David were charged with multiple counts of murder. Their trials were chaotic, packed courtrooms, crying families, graphic evidence. Some saw them as victims of Corll's manipulation. Others saw them as willing participants. Wayne insisted again and again. "I saved lives, I ended it. If I didn't shoot him, we'd still be burying boys today." Many believed him. Many didn't. But one fact couldn't be ignored. Wayne Henley stopped the Candyman. No one else ever came close. Both teenagers were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The legacy of the Candyman. The aftermath left scars across Houston. Parents who never recovered. Communities that no longer trusted the police. Investigators haunted by what they saw. A generation of teenagers who suddenly understood that monsters don't always look like monsters. Dean Corll had operated in the open, smiling, handing out candy, chatting with neighbors, while burying bodies in boat sheds and beaches. His crimes changed the way Houston handled missing children forever. And even today, the story of Dean Corll remains one of the darkest, most horrifying chapters in American true crime history. Because Corll wasn't a Hollywood monster. He was a quiet man living in a rented house. A man whose evil was invisible until it exploded. A man whose horror only ended when a terrified teenager pulled a trigger in the middle of the night and shattered the silence forever. The aftermath of the Candyman murders didn't fade quickly. Even after the final body was recovered, Houston felt like a city holding its breath, trying to understand how such horror had lived in its neighborhoods, walked its streets, and hunted its children without anyone realizing it. Detectives who had spent weeks digging through dirt, sand, and swamp returned to their offices with thousand-yard stares. They had never seen anything like this before. Many never would again. Some developed nightmares that lasted years. Others left law enforcement entirely. The crime scenes were so disturbing, so graphic, so emotionally exhausting that the psychological toll became a permanent shadow in their lives. The families of the victims lived with an even heavier weight. For them, the discovery of their child's remains brought a cruel mix of devastation and closure. Many had spent years clinging to hope, believing their son might call home, might return unexpectedly, might simply walk through the door and explain everything. But hope turned into grief the moment detectives knocked and said the words no parent ever wants to hear. "We found your son. Not alive. Not safe. Not whole. Just found." The trials of Henley and Brooks. Public outrage swelled as the trials for Elmer Wayne Henley and David Owen Brooks began. Courtrooms were packed beyond capacity. Television crews swarmed the courthouse steps. Parents of the murdered boys sat in the front rows every day, staring at the young men who had helped lure their sons to death. Wayne walked into the courtroom with his head down, shoulders tense, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He knew the world saw him as a monster. He also knew many believed he had saved 2 lives, Rhonda and Tim, and ended a mass murder spree by killing Corll. But the law didn't care about the ending. It only cared about the crimes. Prosecutors painted Wayne as a willing participant, a manipulative teenager who betrayed friends for money and favors from Corll. They replayed his own taped confession for the jury, letting his words sink in. The jury flinched as Henley described how he had brought boys to Corll, sometimes knowing they would not come out alive. Wayne didn't deny any of it. His defense argued that he had been groomed, brainwashed, and terrorized from the age of 14. He had lived inside Corll's world for years, first as a friend, then as an accomplice, and finally as a prisoner of fear. His lawyer insisted that Wayne had never wanted to kill anyone, that he had been manipulated by a grown man who knew exactly how to prey on vulnerable kids. The jury struggled. Was Wayne a victim, a predator, or both? In the end, they returned a verdict of guilty, sentencing Wayne to life in prison. He was resentenced multiple times due to trial technicalities, but remained behind bars for the rest of his life. Even decades later, he continued to insist that killing Dean Corll was the one thing he did right. David Brooks' trial was quieter but equally tragic. He appeared timid, withdrawn, almost childlike. His relationship with Dean had started when he was only 12 years old, long before he understood what he was being dragged into. But the law saw participation, and that was enough. Brooks was also sentenced to life in prison, spending years reading the Bible in his cell, rarely speaking to reporters. Some saw them both as evil. Some saw them both as broken. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing. Dean Corll was the true architect of the nightmare. The city that never forgot. Houston changed in profound ways after the murders came to light. Police departments were restructured. Missing persons procedures were rewritten. Juvenile records were more closely monitored. Tips were taken more seriously. Parents became more protective. Kids became more aware of the dangers hidden behind friendly smiles. The phrase "Houston mass murders" stayed in the newspapers for months. Mothers refused to let their sons walk alone at night.